Welcome to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schuman. At the Chamber's recent 30th annual awards dinner, Governor Eric Holcomb was honored as the Government Leader of the Year, at least partially for his efforts in dealing with the state's opioid epidemic. He acted on day one in office in 2017, and a year later, he teamed with the Indiana Chamber and the Wellness Council of Indiana to help launch Indiana Workforce Recovery and tackle that challenge from a workplace perspective. In our chamber interview with the governor, you could hear the emotion in his voice when he talked about those suffering from drug usage and how important it is for the state to do what it can to assist. Our two guests today are providing some of that assistance and certainly teaming with others for the benefit of employers and their workers. Jennifer Fair, Executive Director of the Wellness Council of Indiana, and Mike Thibodeau, Director of the Indiana Workforce Recovery Initiative. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Jennifer, I've touched on the basics, but if you can, give a little bit of the Indiana Workforce Recovery elevator speech in a minute or so. Tell the listeners what Indiana Workforce Recovery is all about.
At the Wellness Council of Indiana, we understand that in order for the state of Indiana to continue to be economically viable, we have to have a viable, healthy workforce in order to hire from. And the Wellness Council is here to evaluate and guide employers through the health conversation. And when we think about the health and well-being conversation, it does evolve, and it has evolved. And right now we understand that when we think about the health of our employees, we are addressing the opioid and the mental health issues that come with that. So in order for us to progress through these conversations, it's important that we've brought all of our partners together and the employers together to develop Indiana Workforce Recovery. Indiana Workforce Recovery was launched about 2 years ago to really take the opioid crisis through the employer lens. And what does that look like? It means we need to educate employers around what substance misuse is, what the opioid crisis is, how it's impacting them and their employees and their families, and really it's helping them come up with best practices and policies to support individuals to get in recovery and stay in recovery when it comes to addiction.
Well, one of the things you said, talk about educating employers. Mike, when you came on board later in 2018 and have been leading these employer opioid strategy sessions, how much has that education component changed? In other words, early on, education probably took one form. I imagine it's a little bit different today as everything has evolved.
Yeah, I think that as we continue to engage with Indiana businesses, we learn more about the unique needs that they have, and we learn more about what they find value in. I think a big part of it that's changed for us is we have shifted away from as much big picture societal education on how we got here, what the issue looks like for society or for the state of Indiana, and we've really lasered in on how it impacts their business, and then focused very intentionally on building content that creates empathy and understanding within the employer space, so that way an individual in a human resource safety executive role can leave our conversations knowing here's why somebody can't just stop using. Here's what it would feel like to be somebody struggling with this disease, and here are tangible action steps that I can take in whatever capacity I'm in to be better equipped tomorrow to handle somebody who might need assistance within my workforce.
So before we started recording today, we were talking about the latest opioid strategy session you mentioned up in Elkhart a few weeks ago, which took place. You mentioned a bit about what employers look at going into a session and how they are at the end of the session. Share that a little bit with our listeners, how you see a quick evolvement over just a few hours.
It's really interesting how in the beginning of these programs, you can see people who are hesitant. I had one individual at that Elkhart event who wasn't quite even sure he was at the right thing and wasn't sure that this was going to be a full day session that he wanted to engage in, but literally by the end of it, he was so enthusiastic and engaging. One thing we see is that by lunchtime, within a couple hours, people have really opened up and they're all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, this is so valuable. This is such an important conversation. And by that point, we're engaging in dialogue with a group who kind of like, as they come in, they're all kind of looking to their left and their right saying, does anybody see me here that I know? Or, what are the implications of us being part of this conversation? How is this going to be? What's going to happen today? Is it going to be worth my time? By the end of it, we have businesses coming up to us, to our exhibitors, to our speakers, and saying, wow, like, here's some ideas I have that I'm taking back to my workplace tomorrow. What do you think about that? How can we continue to assist you in your efforts? There are people leaving these events report very high satisfaction rates with the program. And I think it's always really cool to kind of see just at the beginning, people are getting there, but really at the end, they're leaving and feeling like, wow, that was so impactful and worth my time, with some real tangible tools.
Yeah, I saw that firsthand in early 2019. I was I believe was the first session that you did over in Terre Haute, and sat in the back of the room and kind of watched it and saw exactly that. Employers, not sure what they were doing there, whether they wanted to be there, but that's great that it's come along so much. Jennifer, your thoughts kind of along the same lines as you've seen things beyond the strategy sessions as those conversations have changed over the last couple of years?
I think the conversation is consistent in that people do want to know more. They want to know, they want to learn, they want to figure out where they fit in this conversation. What we've really experienced is that the crisis is real to these employers. I mean, the stories of drug use in the workplace, drug use in the parking lot, family members, employees that are lost, and have passed due to overdoses. It's real. And in every community, that remains very, very consistent. What also remains consistent is that there are still people that are walking in the door that really, truly don't believe this is an issue that they need to be worried about. And when they leave, they have a different perspective. I had an opportunity to talk to a group of lawyers, and the general sense was, you need to limit your liability, you need to terminate immediately, you need to get rid of those individuals. And then the reality is, after they listened to the conversation, they were like, wow, we need to maybe rethink this. The same with mental health.
The legal's one aspect, but not the total picture.
Not the total
needs to take
picture.
place.
Absolutely. And, mental health is another one of those areas where, the idea of helping somebody get to the care that they need, those conversations remain very consistent. And at the end of the day, we really just want employers to invest in their employee population and do what's right for those employees.
So you mentioned education's one of the keys. Certainly one of the terms, the words, the phrases that we talked about from day one is stigma, reducing the stigma. A couple questions on that. Let's start on the employer side, and we've kind of touched on it a bit. But do you either of you think that stigma, that worry, that concern as an employer is still preventing organizations from coming forward and seeking that assistance for their employees?
I think it definitely is. It's the really interesting thing is how stigma is different among this population than it is among a lot of other populations that are affected by this issue. And part of why I say that is, our survey data showed that 70% of employers do believe that addiction is a chronic disease and should be managed like other chronic health conditions. But even the most progressive-minded business leaders that we engage with, who are very forward-thinking, at least comparatively, on this issue, still place so much reliance on individual choice and circumstance that they don't necessarily think in many cases that it's something they have a role to play on. And they think, if somebody wants to get help and they come to me, that's great. But we also know that in 2016, there were over 31,000 Hoosiers who said, I want treatment, I need treatment, but I'm not going because of my job. So how can those same leaders make sure that they're building workplaces that are very open with that desire to assist? And how can we also make sure that as businesses look to engage and have individuals come back, we can both promote open environments that care while also helping them with things like confidentiality and the restrictions that they face. This isn't like going to your family and talking to them about your mental health conditions. If you're a person who's dealing with this in the workplace, or you're a supervisor who's supporting somebody, in some instances that supervisor may or may not even have a need to know basis for the fact that what you're particularly struggling with. So how do we provide environments that both support individuals, are in compliance with regulation, and then also just care and have that ability to retain? It's a really unique challenge that we help businesses deal with.
Jennifer, on the more common probably definition of stigma is around the individual. People thinking that, again, maybe it's a choice and the failure to recognize that it is a disease. I would say on the positive side, have we seen a reduction in that stigma? And I say a greater understanding that indeed this is a disease that is impacting people?
I think things are changing, but I do think it's still, that stigma is still there. Even within the last week, I've talked to a CEO who says, I don't want that individual in my workplace. Once they get their life together, come back. We have heard CEOs that have said, I don't work with people like that. I don't hire people like that. And if you have that mentality, there's really no desire to change policies and procedures because it's not their problem, right? So I think that we do definitely still see that. And, we've seen we've seen over 500, almost 500 people, employers at our convening sessions. That's only 500 employers.
But we'd like to see 500 plus 500 plus thousands more to go through those sessions. Absolutely. Talk a little bit, you mentioned the survey results. We have to touch on that. The survey that was done, and I would categorize them as some promising results and some still troubling results. But what did the two of you take away? And give a brief overview of the survey, how big it was, and again, some of your key takeaways.
So our survey was conducted from November of 2018 through February of 2019. We had over 600 businesses participate, and we were able to achieve a 95% confidence interval for our statewide data. And I think that one of the most impactful things for me was seeing, one, that business leadership has a real high level of belief that this is a community problem. When we took the somewhat agrees into it, we had like 92% plus of business leaders saying this is a problem for my community. The American general populace has that number at 58%. So it shows our business leaders believe this is a community problem in Indiana at a much greater degree than the average American. But despite that, we had only 13% of organizations report that it's a problem for their own group, despite the symptoms and effects in certain instances going as high as 46%. So that was a really interesting juxtaposition.
Sounds a little bit like the mentality we hear so many times around either schools, that education is not getting the job done, but my school's just fine. Or if you want to go to a bigger level, even Congress. Congress is dysfunctional, but I like my congressman. He's pretty good. So here we're saying we got a bigger problem out there, but not in my workplace.
And even that, within my workplace, it's not a problem for my organization, but we are seeing absenteeism. We are seeing family discord. We are seeing arrests. We're seeing theft. We're seeing preterm births. We're seeing fatal and non-fatal overdoses, which combined was over that 13% number for its effect that it's having on business. So we did see a lot of symptoms and effects being reported. And I just think that with this workforce development landscape right now, the fact that you're as likely to get terminated as you are to be referred to care in Indiana is a remarkable statistic. And with about 5% of people, at least nationally, failing drug screens that are incumbent workers on an annual basis, that's a significant number of people who are already qualified to do a job that are rotating in and out of our workforce.
Jennifer, some of your thoughts on the survey and the key takeaways.
I would definitely agree with Mike. I think that those were two of the very surprising aspects of the survey. The other piece that was surprising to me was that so few individuals are referred through their workplace for treatment, where we know that referral equates to longer term recovery. People in seeking care, I think it's a 5-year interval, they're still in recovery. So employers have such a huge voice and such a huge impact not just in the substance misuse, but definitely in our conversation today, it's about the opioid crisis and substance misuse. So why are not employers taking that opportunity to really impact the health of their employees?
Mike, expand on that a little bit. The employer role, and I know there's some great statistics out there. I'll put you on the spot of either the numbers or just of how employers have such a large impact in this area.
Sure. So, among all referral sources to care, meaning how a person enters into the treatment system, employers have the highest level of outcomes when measured at 1 in 5 year abstinence based measures, when measured at the amount of pressure they feel to enter treatment, the length of engagement they have with the treatment system, and also they have the lowest self-perceived need for care of any referral source group. That means that people who are getting care via their employer most often would not pursue care if referred by another referral source. If their friends or their family or any other group that traditionally refers individuals were to say, you need to go get help, those individuals would not necessarily have done so. One of the really impactful things with that is that we can see businesses realize from that issue, wow, I do have a role to play. But nationally, employers only make up 0.4% of all referrals to care.
Say that again. 0.4% of all referrals for care come from the employer community.
And it is the
That's
most
stunning.
effective source. So only 0.4% of our referrals to care come from the most effective source.
And I think that leads to that conversation that we had earlier that Mike shared, that individuals and Hoosiers are more likely to be terminated than to access care. For that first failed drug screen, their likelihood of being terminated is greater than them seeking care. So what does that say? And where do employers have the opportunity to rethink those policies and rethink those best practices so that they can support individuals through recovery? Right now, with our low unemployment rate, we have to get very creative about where and how we're finding employees and retaining employees. And this seems to be one of those low-hanging fruits that if people can adjust their policies to help individuals that fail drug screens get into treatment as opposed to fire them, we can make some headway when it comes to dealing with the workforce issues that we're seeing.
I'll stick up for the employers for a little bit here prior to what's taken place over the past year. The uncertainty that was involved, what steps to take, what can I legally do? Those questions certainly were out there. But legislation that passed in 2018, 17, 18, and then the guidelines that were put in place as a result of that have put a playbook in place for employers, have eliminated a lot of those uncertainties. Talk about those guidelines a little bit and some of the tools that the workforce recovery developed to help employers use those guidelines.
So we've put together, in partnership with the governor's office and the Next Level Recovery Initiative, a really base level set of guidelines for compliance with the Indiana Substance Use Treatment Law, which is the law you're referencing from spring 2018. That law provides some civil liability immunity for negligent hiring for employers. It also provides them with the ability to participate in wage assignments for treatment and related costs, meaning they can mutually agree with an employee to pay back some of those costs over time. One of the things that's really impactful is this program and these guidelines and this general system can be just as effective for referring somebody to care for recreational marijuana misuse as it can be for referring somebody to care for severe substance use disorder. And that's very important as well, because when we look at the rates of failed drug tests for Indiana corporations, marijuana is a very real thing that they're dealing with. And their ability to refer somebody to a best practice system of care that enables that individual to get back to work as soon as possible and be retained is an invaluable tool for our employers to have. It's also a system by which they can learn how to partner most effectively with an institution that provides mental health services and learn how to be a part of the accountability process.
And what I take away, in having viewed the toolkits and the videos, you've taken a very complex situation and challenge and made it as easy as possible for the employer to be able to get some of those answers.
Yeah, there's a series of 7 modules that are available to employers to help them better understand their role in the substance misuse issue and it allows them, step by step to help train supervisors and managers on what they can do to help ensure that their company and their employees have the best access to care that they can get.
So we were pleased from a communication standpoint here at the Chamber to play a very small part in it through 2019, doing a series of stories in our Biz Voice magazine. And now for the shameless plug portion of the show, the last of that series in our current issue of Biz Voice is about Belden Richmond Company and kind of a groundbreaking program it has set up. Program's gotten national attention, everyone from Washington and all over the country looking at that program. Talk about that a little bit, what they're doing, and your thoughts on that initiative and how it is just embracing and doing the right thing for its employees.
So Belden found a way to retain applicants who fail drug screens. And that's a really interesting program because it's not something that traditionally businesses have even looked at how to do. They're also a big reason, I will say, the success of their program is a big reason that the guidelines exist, that the Indiana Substance Use Treatment Law was passed, was all to make it easier for other businesses to participate in that same process. And so when a person fails that drug screen, they're directed to a local mental health center where they receive an assessment from a licensed mental health professional. That individual determines the appropriate level of care and then refers them into that system. If the individual does not have insurance, the assessment center helps them enroll in Medicaid so that way they're able to participate in that public option and begin the treatment process without having as much out-of-pocket expense as they would otherwise. Once they're cleared for work by a counselor, they then move into a safety-conscious role instead of the safety-sensitive role they were initially hired to do. At that point, they're allowed to make a paycheck while participating in appropriate services, and then yet again, once cleared by a counselor, directed to care. The most powerful thing, or directed back to the original position that they were hired for, the most powerful thing about it, however, is that they've truly set up a system of care within the workplace and a team that meets and discusses every single program participant on a regular basis, assesses how they're doing, sees where they can be of more assistance, and really proactively engages with these individuals to support their recovery and provide them with the social supports that they need to be successful. Because in many cases where these individuals will struggle won't necessarily be work. It will be with things like transportation, utility bills, healthcare costs related to participation in a costly treatment system, and other things that are just kind of coming up. And as this group locally there works together to address a lot of those barriers, they've seen pretty astonishing recovery rates.
I would say one of the things that struck me as we put that article together was I'm sure Belden started this at least partially because of the workforce challenge with so many applicants failing their drug test. It seems that somewhere along the way, and it may have been pretty quickly, they're continuing to do it because it's the right thing to do. It is so impactful for these individuals, their families, and beyond.
And when you think about the role of the employer, to invest in their employees in this way, it's the right thing to do, and what they get out of that is a very loyal employee base. So we talked a little bit about retention of staff in this very low unemployment environment. Retention is very, very important, and as opposed to losing somebody in the system, they have made it known to their employees that they're willing to help them. They're willing to help them understand their disease. They're willing to help them manage their recovery, get in recovery, stay in recovery. They're willing to go above and beyond what most employers are doing today.
In the introduction, I mentioned Governor Holcomb acted on day one to start to tackle this opioid epidemic. That was by hiring Jim McClellan to become essentially who became known as the state's drug czar. Just recently, Jim announced his retirement. Of course, Jim took this position after 40 plus years with Goodwill Industries, so this was his almost second career, so to speak. Talk about the impact a little bit, what Jim has had over these last 3 years and the tremendous role he has played.
Jim has been just a staunch supporter and a consistent message out in the community. He has traveled the state, he has traveled the country to ensure that the stigma conversation gets to the right people. He has been there to bring groups together, to bring employers together, to bring communities together, to truly make an impact. He is a real advocate for substance misuse and mental health and in general, and he will be sorely missed by everybody, ourselves included. But he and his lovely wife will have enjoy retirement and grandkids down in Florida and here in Indianapolis. So he'll be missed.
Yeah. Mike, I asked you to share thoughts on Jim, certainly too, as you know Jim very well.
Jim and I have had the pleasure of working together very frequently and being in a lot of the same rooms over the past year. And I think what's been most impressive to me has been his level of empathy. So just as an individual in recovery myself, and as a person who engages with a lot of other community leaders and coalition leaders and sees his interactions with all of them, it's a very welcoming interaction, and it's definitely one where you can see how he works to bring out the best in the people that he's working with. And it's a very collaborative approach that I think the state has definitely benefited very significantly from.
We've talked about the employer sessions and the education and the guidelines and resources. Talk about some of the other ways Indiana Workforce Recovery has been making a difference, some of the initiatives over the past couple of years.
Well, when we think about what Indiana Workforce Recovery has accomplished, the ability to convene over 500 employers, to be in 13 communities. We've distributed over 35,000 drug disposal kits to remove the access to unused prescriptions. We have been recognized nationally through the Department of Labor and the work that's being done nationally. Mike spent a little bit of time at the White House sharing the program and providing his insights there. So the impact is fairly significant. When we think about where the program is today compared to where it was almost 2 years ago, the fact that we've accomplished so much by surveying and understanding where employers are, having an opportunity to change that conversation, to bring more tangible action items to employers, the message has evolved. If you sat in the first employer strategy session, the conversation has definitely evolved to be to meet employers where they're at, to meet the employers, because again, every employer looks and feels different within their organization, and they need to find their own place. It's not going to be a cookie cutter approach where we can go in. So we can go in and talk with them, meet them where they're at, and help them develop policies that are going to work for them. So we've come a long way. The impact has been significant. The calls that we get to continue our initiative, to evolve the initiative. And I think the one thing that I have learned and what we have been able to accomplish is that whether the health crisis is opioids or diabetes, the way employers engage is the same way. We need to ensure.
So this is set up to handle different types of challenges, health and other challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we know about the opioid crisis is that it's opioid today, and then it's another drug of choice tomorrow. So we have to be nimble, and we have to be thoughtful enough that what we've been able to deliver is a strategy that can help them with whatever issue that they're dealing with, from a health, chronic condition, wellness strategy. That these are initiatives that they can take back and use regardless of what it is that they're working on and the drug of choice for today.
Mike, when you came back from that session at the White House this fall, one of the things you said that stuck with me was how, while this is certainly not a competition, we want other states to progress and battle this challenge also, that Indiana was one of the few, if not the only, that had such an advanced employer initiative to really tackle this from a workplace perspective.
I think one of the things that I highlighted, and one of the things they highlighted when we were in D.C., is that there are initiatives similar to this in other parts of the country that are being led by government. However, this is an initiative, and being Indiana and being Governor Holcomb and the chamber, it's no surprise, where instead of government looking to build solutions for business, the governor said, why don't we let business build solution for business? And I think that's been a really key part of our success as we've moved forward. And it's allowed us to take on a lot of stakeholders and bring in a lot of partners that I think aren't necessarily traditionally a part of this same conversation in other states. I think that where it goes even deeper, however, is that there are a really great number of states right now who are doing education on this initiative and building video toolkits and putting together resource websites and doing really amazing things. However, where we're making a difference in addition to all of that is, one, our individual engagement with our members and with companies throughout the state. Two, the level of partnership and communication that we have with invested stakeholders like coalitions and different other partners throughout the state. And I think the third would be our participation in building systems and participating in gap analysis that allows us to convene other invested partners and help build some long-term solutions on this issue to address workforce development challenges and other strategic priorities that employers themselves want to engage in but need a subject matter expert and a stakeholder and a convener to really pull together that role in that conversation for them. So our participation in a number of the U.S. Department of Labor grants going on around the state, for example, is going to make a really huge impact both on employers' ability to connect to a drug-free workforce and also on those individuals in recovery looking to re-engage.
Last question, what's next? We're getting ready to head into 2020. As we say, the work continues, the work evolves, but what are some of the keys going forward that people can expect to hear about?
We will continue the conversations in the local communities well into the spring of 2020, and that's at the request of the communities. They want to bring this program and this conversation into the community. And as Mike just said, we are seeing the desire from employers to have a deeper conversation, to have that one-on-one conversation. So I've heard this, now how do I really do something? And that's where the guidelines are really going to come into play in the education. But more importantly, I think what we have discovered through some of the gap analysis is that employers are looking for a workforce. Recovery communities have a viable workforce, and our ability to really bring those two conversations together so that we can develop some strategies and help those individuals in recovery get into a workforce and be a very, very contributing member within those communities. So the connection is really what's coming next, and the evolution, we will continue to listen to employers and understand their needs so that we can fill those gaps and convene employers in a new and different way.
Mike, any final thoughts as we wrap up?
You know, really, it's just been such a roller coaster over this last year in such a great way. You know, we've had over 500 employers participate in these programs, but we've done education now for over 2,700 individuals throughout the state within our first year of programming. And the ability to translate the recovery-oriented conversations that are occurring to the employer space is a great privilege that we do not take lightly. And whether it's direct consultations for businesses, our partnerships and engagement with communities, our ability to actively engage with other recovery stakeholders and help build up recovery supports, really just the next year is going to be one just of continued evolution and opportunity.
Excellent. Jennifer, Mike, thanks so much for everything you're doing with Workforce Recovery, the Wellness Council, and all the work with the business community throughout the state. We've talked about the employer strategy sessions. We've talked about the guidelines, the videos. You can find all the details on that. wellnessindiana.org/recovery, or search for the Wellness Council of Indiana website. We'll get you to that information. Encourage you to go there, learn the latest, think about it from your individual perspective, wherever you're at as an employer, as an employee, a family member, a friend to others. Think about how you fit into this conversation and what you can do to be of assistance. As always, thank you for listening to the In Chamber. We'll return with our next conversation in 2 weeks.